Well, hello, everybody. My name is Wade Bhuripañño. I'm a visiting monk here at Empty Cloud Monastery, having recently arrived back in the United States from a long stay in Thailand, where I ordained as a bhikkhu in 2014 at Wat Mapjan in Rayong province. Bhante Sutaso has asked me to give a talk on the bhojjangas this morning, and I'd like to apologize for a little bit of a slow start while he's showing me how to operate the computer and the software we're using for the live stream, all new to me. All right, so we'll start with Namo Tassa, and then have a talk for about 20 to 30 minutes with a little bit of time at the end for questions. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Putang Tammang Sanghang Namasami. So that is the traditional homage to the Buddha, homage to the blessed, noble, rightly self-awakened one, said 3 times, followed by I pay homage to the Buddha, his teachings, and the community of disciples. All right, someone's providing me with the clock, so that's very good. Keep track of the time. So the bhojjangas are a set of dhammas provided in the Pali Suttas, which we attribute to the Buddha, in the canon used in Theravadan Buddhism. Comes as a set of Bodhipakkhiya dhammas, which have been translated in various ways as kind of factors of enlightenment, or even like the wings to awakening. A set of dhammas that the Buddha indicated at the end of his career to constitute the special dhammas that he awakened to, that you wouldn't find in other teachings. So while we have, in Buddhism, we have many dhammas about, for example, generosity or morality, and for example, the 4 Brahma Viharas, loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy and equanimity. Many of these teachings can be found in other doctrines as well. But the Bodhipakkhiya dhammas are specific to the Buddha's dispensation. The Bodhipakkhiya dhammas are comprised of several sets of dhammas provided in list form. Each list usually in a form of a sequential list of dhammas to be cultivated. So, for example, the 5 faculties are a relatively well-known list of these dhammas of faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So with faith present, with the arising of faith, we put forth energy, developing energy, or using our energy to develop mindfulness. And with developed mindfulness, we attain to concentration and have insights, have developed wisdom. The bhojjangas are similar in the sense that they are a list of sequential dhammas to be cultivated, although from a different starting point. So while the 5 faculties, for example, start with the rising of faith, the bhojjangas, the bhojjanga factors begin with an investigation, some discernment. Let's see if I can remember the 7 in order, actually. The list of 7 are mindfulness, this is sati; tamma vichaya, this investigation of mental states; energy, rapture, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. Remembering these from the top of my head from from a blessing or a protection chant that we often do in Theravada Buddhism, the bhojjanga parita, which we chant these as part of a longer protection on related to health, actually. So the first item of the list was sati, or mindfulness. There are different ways that the term mindfulness is used in the Pali Canon, and we find it being used in practice. And, for example, it's quite commonly used in mainstream American discussion as a present moment awareness, a clear, objective, present moment awareness as an observer of phenomena as they arise and pass away. So, for example, when we practice breath meditation, we're trying to focus our mindfulness, our present moment awareness, on the breath as it enters and leaves the body, without judging it or thinking about it too much, but just being an observer of the sensations associated with the breath, being mindful of it as the breath entering and exiting the body. Another way it can be used, we see it used in the Pali Canon, is kind of more like remembering to stay with our meditation object, in my opinion. So, for example, if we look at the Karaniya Metta Sutta, the metta is referred to as a form of mindfulness practice. And in this sense, it means simply remembering while we're meditating to bring ourselves back to our meditation object and to try to stay with it so that we can cultivate it and develop it. In the case of the bhojjangas, the mindfulness means taking a look and taking a measure of what are our mental states when we're practicing. So it's a relatively simple form of mindfulness in this way. So, for example, if we're sitting down in formal meditation, or if we're going about our daily activities, we can do a check-in to see what is the state of my mind now, with an eye to how do I manage my mind, how do I take care of it, so that I act skillfully and don't do anything unskillfully. If we take a measure of the mind using mindfulness and the next factor, Dhamma Vichaya, the investigation of mental states, we might see that the mind has any of the mental defilements in it. For example, the three mental defilements most commonly discussed in Thai force tradition Buddhism are the basic lobha, dosa, and moha. Greed, aversion, and delusion, as they're often translated into English from the original Pali. But in the Ajanta tradition, we also talk about them a little bit differently as liking and disliking and delusion. Personally, I like this system quite a bit because it points to the broad, general nature of the classifications. Liking is kind of liking and wanting in its various forms, from very subtle forms to very kind of gross forms to like extreme greed, for example. Disliking being all forms of kind of aversion. So whether it's a mild annoyance, for example, or fear, or all the way up to something like hatred. Okay, so very strong emotions. And then delusion is a lack of awareness in the present of reality as it's happening. So not really seeing what's going on in the present. It's the opposite would be kind of a wisdom or an accurate understanding of what's happening, which can be kind of relatively basic, but if it's developed all the way to the fullest, then it's experiencing reality in the present moment according to the dhammas of the Buddha, for example, the Four Noble Truths, or seeing or experiencing reality as it's occurring in terms of the Paticca Samuppada, the 12 links of conditioned origination. So delusion, the third defilement, would be the opposite of that. The masters of Thailand say it's actually kind of like a fog in the mind, that distorts our perception, so that while phenomena, the changing phenomena of life are impermanent, and they're not ultimately satisfying, and they're not self, the heart clouded by delusion experiences the phenomena of life as being constant, as being ultimately satisfying, and as being us and ours. And so it generates the defilements of liking and disliking with regard to them, and seizes upon them and attaches to them, leading us into all forms of suffering. So if we're sitting down to meditate, for example, or if we're going about our daily affairs, we want to do a check-in to see, what is the state of my mind right now? What kind of mood am I in? What kind of thoughts am I preoccupied with, and this sort of thing. If we find ourselves, for example, experiencing aversion, say anger or annoyance with something, just as by way of example, or if we're experiencing desire for something, say for example, desire for sexuality, or desire for delicious foods or delicious sights, for example. Then what we can do is we can exert an effort. This the third Dhamma in this list of bhojjangas. Exert an effort to apply a skillful technique to go beyond the defilement that we have, or to cause it to allay. So, for example, if we look to the suttas again, if at one point in Venerable Rahula's career. Venerable Rahula was the son of the Buddha, and the first novice ordained by the Buddha. But at one point in his career, he went to his father, the Buddha, and he asked for advice because he wanted to go out on his own, alone in seclusion, and practice meditation. And one of the pieces of advice the Buddha gave him was, well, when you're experiencing sensual desire, practice the contemplation of repulsiveness. When you're experiencing aversion, practice the development of loving kindness. And if you're experiencing discursive thought, then practice mindfulness of breathing. Okay. So this is the Buddha providing his son with antidotes to these defilements. I failed to mention, I talked about liking and disliking, but I did fail to mention the kind of discursive thought, proliferative thinking, and cogitating about something, perhaps something in the past, something in the future. This would be usually associated with delusion. And of course, since we get caught up in the thinking about things, or if the mind is wandering about, it will necessarily give rise usually to either liking or disliking on the subject as well. But if the mind is chattering, then the Buddha advised Venerable Rahula to focus his attention on his breathing. It's a very, very calming to discursive thought. So once we've taken a measure of the mind, we determine what kind of a mood we're in, what's happening mentally for us. We take up a mental skill, take up a practice that's directly related to helping this defilement go away, basically. So again, for example, if we're experiencing sensual desire, we might practice contemplation on repulsiveness. Experiencing ill will, practice loving kindness. If we're experiencing discursive thought, for example, and fantasy and stuff like this, we might practice mindfulness of breathing. So if we take a look at the first of these, if we're experiencing sensual desire and we want an antidote for it, sometimes in Buddhist circles it's discussed as an antidote, we could practice repulsiveness. For example, with sexual desire, we could focus on unattractive aspects of the body. This is a relatively unusual kind of idea by mainstream American standards, wherein we have a tendency to kind of think that our bodies are terribly, they're wonderfully important to us, and we have a tendency to try to think of it in ideal terms. We want our bodies to be to be in some kind of an ideal state, the ideal weight, the ideal. We want the skin to be a certain kind of color and have a certain kind of what's the right word? Kind of texture to it. I'm not sure. We don't want. As I look in the mirror at myself now, I'm 51 in the mornings, to see the wrinkles appearing on the face and the skin sagging a little bit, and it's quite a natural process. But seeing how in American culture we have a tendency to idolize a youthful appearance and a complexion that is perfectly smooth and wrinkle free and this kind of thing. So mainstream society has a tendency to look at the human body in one way. But the Buddha said if we're experiencing, for example, sexual desire, then we would want to focus on the unattractive aspects of it. There's actually there's a reason for this. It's not that the body is either attractive or unattractive, in fact, but it's from the point of view that we want to balance out the mind. Okay, so if we think about that again, it's not that the body is actually repulsive or that it's actually beautiful, but actually that when we're experiencing mental states such as sexual desire, we want to try to put the to go beyond this defilement to a state of balanced peace. Okay, and the advantage to this is that in a state of peace we have more kind of mental composure. We can act more skillfully, and it guards us against doing things that might be unskillful, motivated by sexual desire, for example. When we ordain as monks, one of the first things we receive from our preceptor is actually a meditation on repulsive aspects of the human body. And the preceptor, the officiant at the ordination, he asks us to consider these 5 aspects of the human body that are repulsive, out of a much longer list provided by the tradition. So he tells the new monk, I want you to repeat after me and practice this briefly, because it's a meditation subject that you can use throughout your career, much to your benefit. And the ones he'll give the new monk are hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, and skin. Okay. And so if we practice with this, considering each one in turn, in and of itself, such as hair of the head as something in and of itself, distinct, focusing in on it as part of the body, and consider it. Is hair of the head, is it really is it attractive or unattractive? For example, if we don't wash it very frequently, it's not something that anyone's really interested in seeing or touching. For example, if you go into a restaurant and you receive a bowl of soup or some food and there's a human hair in it, suddenly it seems that the whole dish is spoiled, right? And yet we have this on our heads, and we often don't think about it, and we might even have a tendency to think, to be quite attracted to certain hairs. Hair of the head that's that's in a certain kind of state, in a certain it's in a state that we feel attracted to, and we find beautiful, and so on like this. We can also think of hair of the head. It just occurred to me as in a different stage of development. For example, we might want to have hair that looks a certain way, but what if after many years it looks a different way? It's turning gray, for example, and the consistency is changing, and so on like this. This is pretty unusual kind of contemplation by mainstream American standards. But I think that we can see that how just turning our attention to these kinds of things in this brief discussion, we can see how it has an effect on the mind and how we think about the subject of discussion, in this case, hair of the head, and how if we're feeling caught up in sexual desire, for example, we can, if we turn our attention to something like this, that then the mood can evaporate pretty quickly, and we can turn our attention inward still and feel the more peaceful state, and see how pleasant this is actually in comparison to being caught up in something like sexual desire. Okay. There's similar contemplations, for example, with regard to desire for food. We can consider the repulsive aspects of food, even something else we wouldn't normally consider doing, I think. But there's tremendous benefit for those of us who are trying to manage our desires around food, and be quite liberating and freeing, actually, to not be kind of pushed around by moods and desires in regard to food, for example. If we look at the mental defilement of disliking or aversion in its broad forms, the Buddha advised his son to, when he's experiencing aversion, to practice loving kindness. Relatively frequent teaching of the Buddha in regard to dealing with aversion. He said that actually we really never want to be preoccupied, to be consumed, or to act on aversion, especially in this kind of like its grosser states. If we become very fearful, if we become very angry or hateful. He once told a group of monks, for example, if somebody's doing something to you, for example, and it really seems horrible, really you can't stand, or you take umbrage, that you should consider that in no circumstances should you give way to ill will. And he gave the relatively famous simile of the saw. He said, even if someone were to saw off your arms and your legs. Okay, so this is pretty extreme. If they were to saw off your arms and your legs, okay, even in an extreme situation like that, you shouldn't give rise to anger, he said. And instead, right there with that very person, you should try to develop feelings of goodwill, metta, also translated as loving kindness. A common reflection for me when I found myself in trying circumstances with other people, think, how does this compare to something like, what if this person were somebody were sawing off my arms and my legs? How would this current situation compare to that? And I always had to admit to myself, well, this isn't as bad as somebody cutting off my arms and my legs. So if somebody did something to me that I thought was impolite, if they said something that seemed impolite or disrespectful, or if someone cuts us off in traffic or something like this. I haven't driven in many years, but if someone cuts us off in traffic or something like this, we could think of the standard of the Buddha. If we really want to try to cultivate the teachings of the Buddha and excel in his Dhamma, well, how does this compare to a really extreme situation that actually people do find themselves in sometimes? I remember an inspiring story of monks actually being in prison, being tortured. The relatively well-known stories coming from Tibetan monks being tortured in jail, sometimes in really horrifying ways. I remember hearing a story about a monk being tortured with a cattle prod. Okay, so it must have been quite painful and quite trying. But some of the inspiring stories coming out of the situation was that some of the monastics were able to keep their focus on, even in an extreme situation like this, I should try to have compassion for others, and even for the person and the people who are doing this to me. I remember there's a story about one monk recounting his experience to the Dalai Lama, and he said, I almost failed twice. The Dalai Lama heard this very disturbing story about how he'd been tortured, and he says to the monk, he says, well, you say you almost failed twice. What do you mean by failing? And the monk responded, well, on two occasions I remember that I almost failed. I almost forgot, and gave rise to anger in response to the torture. I became angry at my tormentors. So I think sometimes I remember stories like that. And when I'm I find myself annoyed over relatively small things and think, well, it's a high bar, but it's good to have an ideal and something to kind of look up to and to work towards. So the development of loving kindness we have in a relatively systematized form in the Theravadan tradition. It starts out so the beginning levels. You kind of start out with a saying or a mantra. Perhaps like one that I used, I found quite helpful was, "May I be well, happy, and peaceful. May I be well, happy, and peaceful." According to tradition, we usually start with ourselves and developing this sense of goodwill for ourselves. Uh, and so we simply put our mind on this saying and the wish in it, and thinking, "May I be well, happy, and peaceful." It operates on a simple principle, which is that actually the heart is or the mind, as we usually say in English, the mind is that in us which initiates mental states. And while it typically, for most of us, has a personality of initiating these mental states on its own without consulting us, we actually can take charge of this process, or we can influence it, at least in the beginning. And this is one way of doing that, considering, "May I be well, happy, and peaceful," wishing this for ourselves. At first, the mind may wander. May think of other things, or may doubt this process. Is quite common. It seems, on the one hand, it seems quite simple. On another hand, it's not really something we're really used to doing. Is this if I keep saying this to myself, am I going to really get anything out of it? But typically, people find if they do simply repeat this to themselves many times, they find themselves feeling much happier, much calmer. I remember once I was teaching a lady who was quite sad over a problem in her family. And we usually practice breath meditation together, but on this occasion I said, why don't we practice some loving kindness meditation? And I guided her in this meditation with a simple mantra in the beginning, "May I be well, happy, and peaceful." And I could see the reaction on her face. She thought this was a really strange idea, actually. She really didn't have much faith in it, but she was willing to try. And I kind of encouraged her. I said, "Okay, let's just say this," and every 30 seconds or a minute or so, I'd repeat it again, kind of encourage her to stick with it. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, I guided her in a meditation on spreading loving kindness to other beings. And after just a short meditation of 20 or 25 minutes, we got up from the meditation, and it was quite a visible, a striking transformation. She was so happy. It was like she was kind of like walking on air. And yeah, I was quite surprised actually at how beneficial it had been. I didn't know I could be so hopeful. But so after that, as a reflection on this, if you doubt the process, if you're not sure if you should try it, give it a try at least once and see what kind of results you get, and if you like it or not. So we'd start with this simple, just repeating to ourselves, "May I be well, happy, and peaceful," and repeatedly. And if you feel this over time, you feel a tender feeling in your heart. You feel some softness there. You're feeling good, feeling your mood rising, and then you can also think of sharing the sentiment with others. And so you simply think of, for example, someone who's pretty dear to you. So, for example, a teacher or your parents or a dear friend, and think, "May they be well, happy, and peaceful." And repeat this many times, as sharing this sentiment with them. All you have to do is think of them, and maybe picture them in your heart and share the sentiment with them. And then gradually sharing this wish with others, to more and more people or creatures, your favorite pet, for example, until you reach people who you kind of have a neutral feeling towards. Maybe someone you interact with, you don't have strong feelings really of disliking them. You don't have maybe strong feelings of liking them either. Maybe kind of a neutral relationship, and share the sentiment with them. And then you can move on to people who you may have kind of an antagonistic relationship with, for example, someone you don't get along with very well, and share the sentiment with them as well. We maintain our mindfulness to stay on track with this meditation object, this theme of loving kindness. And we also use our mindfulness to check in with how is it working, and how do I feel. I mentioned this in regard to, for example, if we move on to sharing loving kindness with someone with whom we have an antagonistic relationship, we want to monitor, well, what happens with my mind when I do that? Am I able to successfully stay with the theme, or do I lapse into thinking perhaps kind of negative thoughts about the situation? Do I go into some kind of negativity? In which case we could take a step back and practice towards ourselves again, or someone we have a better relationship with, for example. Okay, so that's the practice of loving kindness, which we would in the list of bhojjangas we could initiate in response to the defilement of aversion or disliking, specifically if there's some kind of ill will towards someone else, for example. In regard to discursive thought, if we find ourselves kind of proliferating about things and thinking quite a bit, we practice the mindfulness of breathing, which is in its simplest form is focusing on the breath and allowing ourselves to breathe naturally, and simply observing the breath as it enters and leaves the body. Quite commonly, observing the sensations at the nostril is a point to be aware of. So just allowing the breath to relax us, if you will. Focusing in on the breath and allowing ourselves to become relaxed, and this allows the mind to become more relaxed as well, and stop thinking so much, and experience more spaciousness. If we practice it quite a bit, it is a very, very pleasant experience from something so simple. Feeling some clarity and some awareness in the present moment, very relaxing for the mind and the heart, very restful, and even because of that, in turn, quite energizing, actually. I just want to, if I may have, to check the time quickly. How much longer should I go? It's about time to wrap up, I think. Is it? We started at 8? Yeah, we started at 8. Okay. Checking. Okay. So I've only made it to let's see, mindfulness, investigation of dhammas, and energy or effort, and the next factor in the bhojjangas would be the fourth one would be piti. Personally, I use the translation of rapture. Extremely pleasant feeling. I talked about the pleasant feelings you can experience from practicing breath meditation or loving kindness meditation, and also contemplation of repulsiveness, a sense of peace inside and calm. And if we were able to further our practice, and start experiencing something like rapture, it's something I think that everyone should. I would wish that everyone would have the aspiration to try and experience something like this. And the reason I say that is that it's once we experience spiritual pleasures, start experiencing the benefit of spiritual pleasures, it really puts into contrast, or illustrates for us the contrast between spiritual pleasures and worldly pleasures. And I think one of the things that sustains many meditation monks is having or experiencing the spiritual pleasures associated with practicing the Buddha's teachings. And I think that if we all have a chance to experience this kind of the fruits of our hard work in practicing the teachings, that then we'll never want to turn back again. We'll never want to go away or fall away from this kind of practice, because it's just so rewarding. Okay, so that's the fourth PT. There are 3 other factors, but that's quite a good start. And I've talked quite at length and in depth, in detail about some of these practices. So maybe we should leave it there, and it's come up to a time for usual closure. So I'll ask Bhante Sudaso is off camera. How should we do the closure? Should I take some questions?
Yeah, if there's any questions online, we can
Okay.
take questions from online.
Okay.
So you could scroll through the comments, and if there's any questions, then we can take those.
Okay.
You can also ask the residents here if they have any questions.
Right. Okay. So I've got a list of looks like some comments and questions. Okay. Okay. Well, the first one is actually not a question. Maybe I'll read this out from one of our attendees remotely. It says, "I don't know how to put this, but thank you. I couldn't shake my anxiety this morning. And this talk made me understand it was aversion-based restlessness. Loving kindness is helping settle my mind." So that's quite nice to hear. So I'm getting right there some benefits from the Buddhist teachings. Okay. We have I have a question here. It says, "Dear Bhante, do you think one should do the 9 charnel ground meditations in a case where sensual desire is strong and not easy to curb?" This is a very good question. Sure. The charnel ground contemplations are meditations on decomposing corpses, actually, decomposing human corpses. So talking about things that are kind of outside the mainstream of American culture. This is one, but it's actually a contemplation given to us by the Buddha in the scriptures, and upheld by the masters that in the right circumstances can be very very beneficial to us developing a sense of peace, a feeling of peace, and some detachment from sensual desire and detachment from the body. My personal inclination with a contemplation like this is that while doing it a little bit at appropriate times probably be very beneficial for anyone, but doing it kind of in depth or for a sustained duration of time is probably good to be able to consult a teacher also about the practice and see if we're developing mental states we really want to, and how to proceed with the contemplation. The next question is, when my mind drifts briefly from the breath, I then go back to the breath. Is the complete mindfulness lost during the interim or just temporarily? Okay. I think I understand the question. Sure. So the mind, it's quite natural for the mind to drift. And we all experience it, and it says, I think it says in the sutras that the Buddha exclaims many times about how difficult it is to control the mind, how the mind wanders. And so when the mind drifts, you say you bring it back to the breath, which is wonderful, and you ask, is complete mindfulness lost? Or is it just temporary? And we actually have an opportunity every single moment to assert mindfulness, whether in meditation or any other time during the day. And any lapse in mindfulness is only temporary. And so if we bring our mindfulness back to the object, we may find that we're able to build and develop our mindfulness going forward. And we don't have to think necessarily that everything is lost. Although actually it is possible to completely lose your mindfulness. I think if we let the mind go for an extended period of time, something to consider if we don't keep up our practice. Kind of like if we don't go to the gym, if we're in the habit of going to the gym to stay in shape, and we don't go for a while, and we go back to the gym for the first time after a long time, we find it quite difficult. And the same thing is true with our mindfulness practice. So that's an encouragement to try and keep up the practice. And yes, when the mind drifts, to bring it back. So, okay. Should anyone present like to ask a question? If I see a couple of hands up, so maybe we can ask Ronka or Linda.
Just a clarification when you spoke about mindfulness. In the Buddhist context, doesn't right mindfulness always have some measure of right effort or non-passivity, like not letting everything in and just observing? And I just got a little confused. So isn't there,
Okay.
does right mindfulness always have some level of right effort in it?
Aha. I think so. I'm not sure from a technical point of view. I'm not sure, but I think so. I think that if you're trying to assert mindfulness, okay, in order to allay an unskillful mental state, or to develop a skillful mental state, then that would count as right effort. Excuse me. Yeah. So if you're trying to do something skillful in order to be skillful, then you're exerting right effort. And that thing you do may be the assertion of mindfulness, right? So too, yeah. Okay.
John, could you say a little bit more about Dhamma-vichaya? It's, when I think about investigation and inquiry, it's something I do discursively all the time, right? So if you could give me an example of when that is skillful and how it might bring awakening.
Okay, sure. Well, Dhamma-vichaya, or investigation of dhammas, is also we've got it in the bhojjanga factors. We also have it in the four foundations of mindfulness as the fourth domain of mindfulness. And if we look at what we have in the suttas for examples of what to practice with in that area, it's actually quite a long list. So we have mental states, and then we have I think in one version of the sutta, and perhaps both versions of the Satipatthana Sutta, we have the four noble truths, for example, and many of the dhammas we find in the rest of the suttas. So what I could do is I can answer from what I'd have to do is answer from my experience in kind of a practice-oriented way. That if we're trying to implement that dhamma from the bhojjangas, the Dhamma-vichaya, then what we would do is look actually kind of at the mood, or the mental state that we're in. This is an emphasis in the Ajahn Chah tradition. What kind of mood do you have going into a situation, or just what happens to be present right now, because our moods so strongly influence us, and so we want to be in a state of kind of clarity, not have a strong emotion present, a strong unskillful emotion, I should say. And even it could apply to the various skillful emotions, and see which of the emotions that are typically skillful is actually skillful right now. So we had a discussion about the four Brahma Viharas previously, and about how in some situations you might practice loving kindness. You might want to have loving kindness present. In other situations, you may want to have equanimity, for example. And so having the presence of mind, mindfulness, to look into the mind, see what am I experiencing right now, and what is appropriate for the situation, what's most skillful. So that's how I practice with Dhamma-vichaya, and I think it's kind of the practice methodology of the Thai forest tradition and the Ajahn Chah tradition. So it's kind of what I'm able to discuss in relation to it. Okay. So maybe that's everyone. Okay.
Namayang Dhammakataya Sadhukarang Nadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodam.
Take care, everybody. Good luck with your practice. Until next time, goodbye.